They are way more powerful than they believe, and that they do have a choice. And you don't have to buy in to what the media is telling you, or even what society is telling you,
Mm-hmm.
how you should live, how you should be. There's a lot of myths out there about how we're supposed to show up in the world that have been generation. And it's like, it's time to break those open for the lies that they are.
Yes. Welcome to the place where we hear empowering stories of transformation and then we turn that into art that reminds us to be great. I am your host and artist, Jessica James, and this is the I Empower Podcast. Carolyn, thank you so much for being with me today. I am so excited to hear your story and to talk to you about all the amazing things that you are doing. I always like to tell my listeners and my followers where I find my guests. And my husband actually met you at a networking meeting, and he came home and he says, "I have a girl that you need to talk to. You need to hear her story. You've got to put her on your podcast." And so I was like, "All right." He's such a good guy. He tries to find people for me all the time, and anytime someone sounds like someone that he thinks that will connect, and ultimately just has an amazing story and inspiring people. And so I was like, all right, let's do it. So thank you, Carolyn, so much for being on today.
Yeah, Dylan is awesome. He is a great guy.
He's a good
So
one.
I'm so thankful he connected us.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about yourself. You sent me your bio, which is an incredible bio. Like, I was like, oh my gosh, where do we start? So I will let you tell me how you got to be where you are today. And you have a book you're an author of the book called Get the F Out, Liberating Fear and Letting Love In. And I was immediately intrigued when he told me about your book, and I was like, okay, let's do this. So I'll hand the mic over to you.
Okay, great. Well, it's been, like a lot of life's journeys. It has not been a straight path. It's had a lot of circles and twists and turns and valleys and peaks. And really, how I got to where I am today really came from going through a divorce in 2010. So when my husband and I, which I now call him, my husband and I divorced, I went through a really, really dark period. I had been, on a spiritual quest, on a personal journey. I have a degree in psychology and had always been intrigued with personal development and spirituality. But even with studying that, I just took a major nosedive. I was really depressed. My self-esteem was completely in the toilet. Maybe even below that, probably in the sewer. I felt really bad about myself and who I was. And, despite putting on good appearances, everything was okay. Oh, yeah, I'm doing fine. But I wasn't doing fine, and I also, my daughter was 10, or our daughter was 10 at that time. And so I felt like I had to put on a good face for her. But inside, I was really a mess. And it took me a while to kind of, some people can like skyrocket out of that. But I think really the majority of people, it's a one step at a time. It's a moving forward, getting some momentum, and going back. And for me, that's what the process was. But one of the things that became very clear to me during that time was how much I had allowed fear to rule my life and dominate my life. And that was really tied in with a lack of self-esteem. So from the outside, it looked like I had this, really good career in pharmaceutical sales and married. I had this amazing daughter, but there was all this self-doubt. There was all this unworthiness that through this divorce just came up. It was ready for it to come out. So, I had a therapist say to me one time, you can stuff your emotions down and keep stuffing them and keep stuffing them, but at some point they're going to come out. And,
Most definitely.
they can manifest as disease. They can manifest as self-sabotaging behavior. They can manifest as addictions, but they're going to come out. So for me, it was really recognizing, wow, despite, appearances that everything was good and strong, I'm a very strong, resilient person. I've got some stuff I really need to work through. And I and I'm letting this fear, these feelings of resistance of not being good enough and worthy, really determine my life instead of me. And that really places you in a victim mentality instead of me being responsible for my own life and my own feelings and my own thoughts. So part of that journey was really, tapping into resources, books. There was a spiritual community I attended when I lived in Delaware that really focused on that, we are very powerful beings and we have the choice. How you feel, how I feel, that's a choice in every moment. And so that journey has taken me from being at that place to a place of understanding that I am powerful. I have a choice. Now, do I always act and feel and behave from that higher level? No. Sometimes I'm gritty. Sometimes I'm mean. I still have a lot of work to do around that. And yet, I personally believe it's a lifelong journey. And it's about waking up every day and setting the intention for how you want your day to be and setting the intention for how you want to feel. And then having the conscientiousness of when you get slapped upside the head, and you have, which happens, you get things thrown at you sometimes that really, throw a wrench into your day. Having the ability to step back, maybe your initial reaction is going to be that instinctual reaction, that fear, that flight, and that can come out as anger or whatever. But then having the mindfulness to step back and say, okay, I have a choice here. How do I want to choose in this situation? So, for me, being on that journey and writing the book really opened up a lot of, I don't want to say doors for me, but it opened up my mind, as to how I could live my life. Now, the thing that's really interesting about that, though, is right after I published the book, I went through another really, really dark period. Really dark period. And it was almost like the universe said to me, hey, you know this stuff, but can you walk your talk? And the truth was I couldn't. I knew it in my head, but I didn't really know it in my heart. And for me, since then, that is what I'm learning. I'm learning, how do I connect that? How do I connect that knowledge that I know in my head to my heart and to live from that place. So, and that's ongoing. And that, takes practice. It takes daily practice. Because in order to live your best life, you've got to have tools and practices that bring you back to that center, to your heart. And actually, even recently, I realized that I had become somewhat disconnected from my heart. And I was listening to, I don't know if you know who Dr. Joe Dispenza is, but I'm a big fan of his. And he has these heart coherence meditations on YouTube. And I'm like, wow, I got to come back to that.
Yeah.
So it's like there's a saying, I think it was by Rumi, and it was about, I continue to come back onto myself. I continue to come back onto myself. And for me, what that means is continually, checking in with yourself, continually connecting with yourself and that part of you that knows the truth, that knows that you are amazing, that knows that, in my belief, you are a divine being. So that's really how I got from there to where I am now.
Yeah, that's incredible. I was over here like making notes because you were talking about so many things that I resonate with personally, and I was like, I have got to circle back and talk about that. I want to talk about your divorce and how you found yourself in a really dark place, because as you're saying this, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's me. That is so me. And I think it's important. I always talk about sharing our stories, and I swear every single guest that I've had on this podcast, there is some part of their story that I connect with. Right. And that's why I think it's so important that we just share. And so we it makes me feel good that I'm not alone when someone shares something. So, you mentioned going through the divorce, and, a lot of people think of, oh, that's your freedom, like you're getting out, you should feel great. And you mentioned kind of going into a really dark place. You mentioned self-esteem being really low, and I experienced that as well. I was ready to get out of that relationship, and I hid it. I hid being okay, and I hid my self-esteem. I projected a certain image that I wanted everyone to see, but deep down inside, I was really struggling, and it got really dark and very scary for me for a little while. And, just being able to pull myself out of that. How were you able to kind of, shift that path? Because there are people that don't maybe ever get out of that darkness, right, or it takes a lot longer. So, for someone who may be like, I'm going through that now, or is fearful of that if they leave that relationship, that might happen. So what would be your advice for helping someone help themselves?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. First of all, and I did not do this, and you know how hindsight is 2020. I would have gone and gotten some counseling right off the bat, or joined a divorce group, and I didn't do that. And I think this goes back to the lack of self-esteem. I've had this mindset a lot of my life that I had to go it alone. That well, it's up to me, and not to ask for the support I needed. I was always there supporting other people. I was always there, the people pleaser.
Almost like it would make me appear not as strong. I wanted to come out of that like superwoman, like everyone's like, oh, she did it. She's so strong getting through this. So I, like you said, I didn't seek any help, but I was struggling with the appearance that I wasn't.
So the first thing I would say when you're going through a divorce, find a support group, find a therapist, get that support, because even if the divorce is mutually agreeable and not super messy, um, there's still so much emotion attached to it. For me, it was the loss of the dream. When you get married to someone, you have this dream, this vision of what your life is going to be like. And then when that doesn't happen and you end up getting divorced, it's like I failed. Like I felt like I was such a big failure. And I was so filled with like guilt and shame because I felt like, well, I let the marriage down. I'm letting my daughter down.
Mm-hmm.
Now she's
Mm-hmm.
comes from a divorced home. So I think had I had the support um, from a divorce group to say, hey, these are normal emotions. And here's how you work through that. What I did do, though, which ultimately helped me a lot, was the spiritual center in which I was a member at the time. So that was a very strong, supportive network of people. And that helped me through a lot of it, you know. And friends too,
Yeah.
the support of friends. But I think one of the things that we have to remember is we're not alone. We're part of this very, over 7 billion people who are really interdependent. Even though we seem to separate ourselves a lot, we actually are. And it's really, I think, much more powerful to ask for help than and to say, I need support, I need help, than to try and go it alone. I mean, when you look at that from a business perspective, so to speak, no business is expected for one person to run and grow and scale the business. Even if you're a solopreneur, you are maybe outsourcing some help,
Right.
right? Maybe hiring VAs or outsourcing social media or whatever,
Yeah.
because you can't do it
You
alone. So
can't. If
why?
you
So
try
why
it,
do
it's you're
we?
gonna yeah.
Right. So why do we feel like in our personal lives, like I am woman and
Yeah.
I can do it all, and who gave us that myth? Like, oh, I go out. Remember the commercial? I go out and earn the money and I bring home the
Yeah.
bacon and I fry it in a pan and I never let you forget that you are a man. Well, fuck that bullshit.
Yeah.
Because, because you can't. I mean, you can, but you're going to burn yourself
You're
out.
gonna yeah. Yep.
And, and,
You're gonna
and you're
burn
going
yourself
to
out.
end up being not true to yourself and really unhappy. So, you
Most
know,
definitely. And ultimately, living a happy life is like everyone's goal. Like
it
we want to
is.
be happy and fulfilled and not tired all the time. So yeah, most
Exactly.
definitely. I love that
Exactly.
advice because we
So,
talk about community all the time on the podcast and the importance of the fact that, and you know this probably from experience, but also with your background, that we are social creatures and we need to
we
be
are.
connected. And so I love that you said that. I'm always advocating, find a safe space that you feel comfortable in, and start the healing there.
Yeah, absolutely. And finding that safe space, I think one thing that COVID has brought, maybe some good, is that I believe there are more online safe spaces now
Yes.
because we were forced to go that route. So your safe space doesn't necessarily have to be where you live, although that's great. And hopefully there are safe spaces there. where you live. However, if not, there are a wealth of online communities now, particularly I think where women can connect and feel supported and feel heard and be able to grow and really reach for that next level of themselves and
Yeah,
heal.
most definitely. Oh, I love
Because
that. Yes.
I think as women, we have so many shared stories, we have so many shared experiences, and a lot of times I don't think we talk about it. You know, we're told
Yeah.
not to talk about it, or we feel like we're going to be looked down upon.
Yeah.
But there's a lot out there that I think the more we share and we're honest and vulnerable and authentic, it's going to help the generations after us.
Yes. I think about
You
that all
know,
the time with my daughter and trying to instill in her strength, but also reminding her that it's okay to need help and to be vulnerable and all of that. And, I think it's difficult, so again, I resonated with your story because my daughter's 10. And even though she was a bit younger when I went through that divorce, but also just, realizing for me that I wanted to get out for myself, but at the same time, and I'm not sure what fraction of the end goal was for her, but I wanted to make sure that she knew what a happy life looks like and what a healthy marriage looks like, and so that was what was important for me for doing that. And just like you said, I don't want her to be that generation. I don't want her to follow in my footsteps, and my footsteps are my mom's footsteps, and I'm sure it probably goes back a little bit later than that as well. But I really wanted that trauma and that generational, I don't want to use the word curse, but I kind of want to say
right.
curse. I want it to stop with me, and for my oldest daughter, and then again for my youngest daughter. So I love that you said that.
Yeah, thank you. And absolutely. I think the younger generations have an opportunity to see the mistakes we made, which I don't really think are mistakes. They're really learning experiences and part of our journey for a reason. Um, they have an opportunity to see that and make different choices. And, that's really how I believe we can support them, is say, look, these were the choices I made.
Right.
Ultimately, they were not in my best interest, but this is how they've served me. So
Yeah.
you can take that and make your own choices. And I see with my own daughter, who's 23 now, who is very strong willed. She gets that honestly from both sides. But she has she is not afraid to speak her mind. She knows what she wants and she asks for it, and she is doesn't feel ashamed about that. And she'll stand her ground. And I love that about her. I love that about her. Even sometimes when she and I are butting heads, because she has that confidence within herself that, I've worked for years to get. So I'm like, well, at least, she has that, and it's going to
Yeah.
serve her well. And I see her communicate so much better with her boyfriend than when I saw how I communicated with her father.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, this is good. And
Yeah.
because our hope for our daughters is when they choose a partner, whoever that partner is that they're in a long-term loving relationship, and that we don't go through some of the shit that we went through. Right. I mean,
Most
that's what you want for
definitely.
your kids, is for them to be happy and have a really good life. So,
Absolutely. Hello, beautiful. I just wanted to pop in here really quick and remind you that if you love what you're hearing and you want to hear more of it, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel so that you don't miss next week's episode of I Empower. And if you're feeling extra generous and you would like to give us a review, we would greatly appreciate it. Those help bump us in the algorithm so that more people are able to find these empowering stories to help them. Also, don't forget to check out the art that goes along with today's episode. You can do so at iempower.club or on Instagram at iempowerclub. And if you personally feel connected to the story and the art and you would like to purchase a limited edition print that goes along with it, you can do so on our website. As a reminder, all of the art sales go to support the podcast and help us continue this mission each week of bringing you empowering stories. All right, back to the show. And you mentioned choices and how we are in control of the choices and ultimately in control of our life and our life's path. How did you get to that point where you just, did it just click for you one day that I can make that choice? And also the choices that we make determine what kind of path that we have. But what happens if you are fearful of those choices?
right. Well, fear is a funny thing. I mean, really, people talk about, overcoming fear, and you can overcome fears of certain things, right? Sometimes you gotta go through it and face it,
Yeah.
right? And that's how you do it. But so much of what we fear as humans really is a resistance to something. So I have an acronym that I created for fear, and it's feelings experienced as resistance. So there's a lot of other acronyms for fear, what's one of the common ones? Feelings that are not real. I forget what it is right now.
Yeah.
I wish it would come to me. But anyway, to me, yes, that is a great acronym. But for me personally, like, let's say you are struggling financially and you have bills due and you don't know how you're going to pay them, right? This is something I've personally experienced,
Yeah.
especially during that post-divorce time. You know, feelings that are appearing that aren't real. Well, not having that money in your bank account, that's very real in that moment, right? So for me, fear is more about feeling resistance. It's feeling like, oh my God, I can't pay my bills. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? And just going down that rabbit hole of panic and victim.
Yeah.
And I just want to put my head in the ground and I'm not going to answer the collection phone calls and, all that kind of stuff. You're in such a state of resistance. So, how do you overcome that? Well, the first thing is to admit what you're feeling. Like, you got to be honest with yourself and say, okay, well, how did I manifest this current situation?
Right.
Like, because I did. I'm the creator of my own reality. So how did I manifest that? And then again, that whole thing of coming back to yourself, breathing, getting quiet and listening and saying, okay, I have a choice here. And am I going to live by default? Or am I going to take back my power and be responsible for my choices and what I decide to do here? So again, to that example, instead of ignoring the bills and letting them pile up or, avoiding the collection calls or whatever, being proactive. Okay, well, maybe what I need to do is pick up the phone and say, hey, I'm struggling right now. Will you work with me?
Yes.
Will you work with me? And that puts you back into a place of power. And it may be embarrassing, right? Because you got to come clean with yourself and you've got to come clean with somebody else. But ultimately, it brings that power back to you. And then you go, in hindsight, you say, yeah, that was uncomfortable. It was really pretty shitty. However, I got through it and look where I am now.
Yeah.
I took a stand for myself. I was deliberate in my actions and in my thoughts and my choices. So, for me personally, I have spent a lot of my life in default mode. I'm kind of a very sort of go with the flow type person. Um, and so, oh yeah, that sounds like fun. Oh yeah, that's neat. Oh yeah, yeah. But then ultimately, I'd end up in a place I'm like, why am I here? Because I wasn't being deliberate about what I really wanted. And
Right.
I was placing other people's priorities ahead of my own. And so,
Mm.
I think for me, what I've learned, part of my life journey, and I'm still learning it, is that making those choices, you have to get quiet and get really clear about what is it that you want out of this life. What brings you joy? What is fulfilling to you? What are you passionate about? And then start doing those things. It may be a career, it may not be a career, and that's okay too. But adding
Mm.
those things into your day and being deliberate about it. I have a mentor and good friend in Delaware, and Troy is just a phenomenal um, woman. She's a counselor, she's a consultant, she really understands business, um, and she's just a powerful woman. And, she always says, be deliberate, be deliberate. And when you think about that, being deliberate means I'm really focused on what I want. I'm really focused on the actions I'm going to take. I'm really focused on the choices I'm making. To me, that's what being deliberate is. And I sometimes I still have to remind myself of that because I get, and then I got to hone back in to that.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Almost like setting your intentions for the life that you want.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when you set your intentions for what you want, you're ultimately going to create actions that are a result of that, or, not, I don't think result's the right word that I'm looking for, but almost like a puzzle, like a board game. You
Right.
are setting your pieces together. You know that your ultimate goal is this at the end. What moves do I need to make that happen? And I think that you, as you're telling me all this, I'm just thinking of you and how much you and my husband are alike. You guys are like two peas in a pod. No wonder he was like, you
Yeah.
have to talk to this girl,
Yeah.
because that's how he is. He's like such. I used to tell people that I swear he was an alien. He's an alien because his positivity and
Uh-huh.
his just outlook on life is just not what I'm used to, because I
Right.
spent a lot of my life in a negative. I love my mom, but she, I've told her before, like, you always go to the negative. Why do
Right.
you kneecap yourself? Like, you are thinking of the worst possible case scenario, so you're not even giving yourself a chance to have greatness because of the fear of what if this happens, or what if that happens? I'm so
Right.
scared. And then the marriage that I was in before Dylan, very negative attitude. Always, some of the things that he would say was, I would tell him, I'm like, you're so negative, pessimistic. And he's like, no, I'm, and I was like, well, be optimistic, because I
Uh-huh.
think from a young age, I've always had optimism. And he would say, well, I'm a realist, and that's not reality, and this, that, and the fourth. And so I think because I was in that relationship for about 11 years, that was my whole exist, like when you're surrounded by that negativity for a really long time, and then also growing up in a negative household, because mom, bless her heart, but like that's, she knows she is. So like, she hears this, she's not gonna be like, what? But she knows she is. But yeah, so like having that negativity and really just trying to break that. And so it's a work in progress for me. We'll have day-to-day things like, I think the other week I had to have some things done on the car, and I was like, oh, well, what happens if I'm without a car for this long? How am I going to handle this? How am I going to handle that? And and Dylan says, you're like freaking out before we even know like what's going to go on. Like, why are you building up this terrible thing that could happen before you even are given the opportunity to see what the outcome could be? And so it's just, I love to hear people with positive mental attitudes and mindsets. But at the same time, I'm always like, I want more of that. How do I get more of that?
Right. So, interesting. My husband was the same way. Um, at one point in our marriage, this was the last, so we were married for 13 years. The last couple of years, we decided to refinance our house. And, we had a 15-year mortgage, and we were going to a 30-year mortgage. So it would reduce, our mortgage payment. And I remember sitting in the attorney's office, and the attorney said something to him about, he's like, this is going to free up money for you. And he goes, and the fact of the matter is, most people don't stay in their homes for 30 years anyway. You're probably going to end up selling a house, and this is going to lower your payments. And Steve said something negative about it. And then he said, well, and my ex-husband said, and I'm just a half glass empty kind of guy.
Oh gosh.
And the attorney kind of like looked at me, and I'm like,
I know.
And really that negativity, but I still have those demons that I have to, and I don't like to use the word battle, but that I recognize, because just in everyday thoughts of some things, I will naturally go to the negative. And then I catch myself and I go, why am I thinking this way about this?
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be that way. And the conclusion that I have come to is, I think this is how we're wired. Because we're wired for safety. That our amygdala, that fight or flight, in our brain, we are wired to survive. And I think part of that negativity is that even though we may not have animals chasing after us, there are other things. There's situations, there's people, there's, whatever's going on out in the world. Chaos, politics, all this stuff. And we get bombarded, every day on the daily. And so I think a lot of times that initial sort of knee-jerk thought reaction is negative, because we're constantly, from our brain perspective, in survival mode.
Yeah.
And, the good news is, though, you can catch yourself and you can change it. And you can ask yourself, well, why do I always think of the worst case scenario? Because I catch myself doing that. And my mother, too, was pretty negative. And so I think
Love
some
our
of it,
mothers, but
I think some of it
generational.
was just generational, and that's what
Genetic,
I grew up with. But genetic. But it is. It's like, but our brains are so powerful, and our subconscious is so powerful. So, all of that learning, early childhood learning, all those things we absorbed that we're not even aware of, that still
Yeah.
has an effect on us. The good news though is that as an adult, we can consciously choose and say,
Yeah.
is that thought really serving me? Like,
Exactly.
if I'm thinking that, you know, is there going to be a positive outcome there? And you
Yeah.
can change it. You can change it.
Yeah. Almost like, the instead of looking, because we probably inadvertently look for the negative, but almost, okay, well, let me look at let me force myself to look for the positive
Mm-hmm.
and really just kind of embrace that. And that, and I do think a lot of times our negative thought patterns, can come. I do want to highlight the fact that I think if you've experienced trauma, it's it's a natural thing to, like you said, to be on guard all the time and
Mm-hmm.
always think of that way out. How do I think of that way out as, a safety mechanism in the brain? But then, of course, recognizing for me, like, I didn't realize I always saw the negativity around me and I always thought, gosh, they're so negative all the time. And that was one of the things that I used to say to my ex-husband all the time was just, gosh, you're so negative all the time. And so like, I see that, but then I have, so then I don't feel like I'm that negative because I've seen like the worst negative. But
Right.
then my husband, who is so positive now, when I go to that negative thought, pattern or process, he recognizes the negative. And so it's kind of almost like it went from worse to better, and then it's me. So now I think it's important, where I'm getting with this is that you recognize where that comes from and you
Mm-hmm.
become aware of it. And then when you become aware of it, it makes it easier to catch and to redirect your thinking.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's a process. It's you know, I don't think there are many people that can go from feeling negative emotions to never
Mm-hmm.
feeling any negative emotions. I mean,
Right.
that's just part of how we're wired. So I think it's a process. And the other thing, too, is to be gentle with yourself,
Mm-hmm.
and not beat yourself up. I mean, I, you know, I know there are times when I am really negative. Um, and I need to, acknowledge it and take ownership of it.
Yeah.
And yet, negative emotion, that is part of who we are. And it can serve a purpose, but you have to recognize what that is. If you're continually having negative emotion around one thing, then it's like, okay, there's
Mm-hmm.
some shit here I haven't dealt with. So what do
Yeah.
I need to work through? Like there's
Yes.
some underlying beliefs here that I need to work through. So,
Yeah.
what do I need to do about that? Is it journaling? Is it going and
Mm-hmm.
getting, some counseling around it or whatever? But if it's reoccurring, then there's something that needs some greater awareness,
Yeah.
and healing.
Yes, I love that. Oh my gosh. Such good advice, and you're so full of knowledge. Oh my gosh. I did notice on your bio that you've done some TEDx talks.
I did
Tell
one.
me about
I
you did
did one
one? Tell me how
TEDx
that
talk.
was for you.
Oh my gosh! So talk about fear.
Yeah.
No, that was really exhilarating. I will say I've never been more scared to get up on a stage
Yeah.
as that when I did the TEDx talk. Um, that it was such a great experience. I didn't really have a lot of time to prepare, so that that particular venue, typically I think this is the only one I've done, but typically I believe you have about 6 months to prepare because there's a lot
Yeah.
of little steps you need to do. Well, when I applied for the TEDx and got accepted, I had 3 weeks.
Oh
So
my
I
gosh.
had to write the talk, tape it, send it to
Yeah.
them, practice it. And the gentleman who was like the producer, wanted all the talks to be memorized. So
Oh
most
my
of the time
gosh.
when I speak, I know what I'm going to talk about, but there's some leeway,
Yeah.
you know, for me to, I get, a thought, for that thought to come through and kind of
Yeah, and
channel
then you kind
through
of go,
me. Yeah,
yeah, I agree. I'm the same way.
not, I had to have this talk memorized. And that was
Wow.
really challenging. It took a lot of work. But it
Mm-hmm.
was a great experience. So my talk was on um, using curiosity to create innovation in community.
Ah.
And, I was talking about how sometimes we shut our curiosity down because of fear of failure, and the fact that we need to embrace failure, as a part of learning and growing, and allow it, because really innovation comes through failure. If
Yeah.
you can't fail, you can't innovate. And so that's pretty much, what my talk was about. And
Yes.
having the courage to step up and do that and be willing to fail,
Yeah.
and the willingness to stay curious too. So, because
Yes.
that's how, really, in your own personal life and in businesses, you thrive and grow, is by being curious and being willing to change and grow and innovate,
Yeah.
you know?
Oh,
So,
I mean, I
yeah.
love that. I feel like I've almost like I've either read it somewhere or heard some quotes about, fear and failure and how the greatest people that have ever made any of the greatest things in the world had to fail at some point, if not multiple points, in order to get where they are. So I love that you're saying that. It's almost
Yeah.
like turning failure into a positive word. It's not a bad thing. It just, gives you what not to do next time, and then that
Right.
way you just keep going forward from there. So that's awesome. So tell
Yeah.
me, where can we find your book? Would this be considered a self-help book? Tell me
Yeah.
all the juicy stuff about it.
Yeah. It would be considered a self-help book. It is, so I think you can get it on Amazon. I've recently had some issues with Amazon though, so I haven't quite resolved them yet. I think you can still get it through Amazon. Um, and it's a book about, it is self-help. It's also about connecting to what I call your IGS, or your inner guidance system. So it's
Mm,
also a spiritually based book. um, I feel like we do have an inner being, whatever you want to call that, a divine self,
yeah.
a higher self that guides us and supports us. And, you know, when you learn to tap into that, whether you call that your intuition, whatever you want to name you have for it, but really listening to that is going to guide you to the path of your greatest happiness,
Ah,
and your greatest joy. And so the book is about that. I'm actually in the process of revising it,
oh,
which I've been
yay.
wanting to do for years. And finally, this year, I said, no more excuses. Like, I need to
I gotta
revise
do
this
it.
book. I got to do
Yeah.
it. So
Awesome.
that's what it's about. There's the different chapters have different themes. And in the last chapter, I share a 7-step process that can be used when you're in that state of fear, to kind of walk you down out of it and give you a different perspective.
Awesome.
So
Yes.
that
So
is,
awesome.
like I said, I think you can find it on Amazon. The last, Dylan has probably told you the last like 4 years, most of my time and energy has been supporting my partner with his
Yes.
business. And so I kind of stepped away from my own, and yet now feel that calling. It's calling me back.
Coming back. Yes, come
Like
back to me.
you've got to come back and do this
Yeah,
work and fulfill this work. So
I love
I
that.
have set the intention. That's why I'm working on revising the book, um, because I think it's really important, and especially now our society's so fear-based. We're seeing such conflict and contrast,
Mm-hmm.
particularly, well, in the world, but particularly in our own country.
Yep.
And if we lead with the fear, if we allow the fear to control us instead of understanding where it's coming from and really taking back our power, and being mindful about the thoughts we choose and how we think and how we behave, um, I think it's going to get really ugly. And,
Yeah.
that's a choice. It doesn't have to be that way. So I feel very called to, to come back to my work,
Yeah.
because I think people need to understand that there are other options out there, and that they are way more powerful than they believe, and that they do have a choice. And you don't have to buy in to what the media is telling you, or even what society is telling you,
Mm-hmm.
how you should live, how you should be. There's a lot of myths out there about how we're supposed to show up in the world that have been generation. And it's like, it's time to break those open for the lies that they are,
Yes.
you know? Um,
Oh my gosh.
and a lot of rules. I did not make up that word. That's from a book that I read, and from the guy who started Mind Valley. And bullshit rules, that again, we've been fed for multiple generations, that it's time for us to really take a look at some of these things and say, like, you have to suffer to be successful. Really?
Yeah.
Why? Why do I have to suffer to be successful?
Yeah, I hate
Do I
that.
have?
I hate that thought.
I do too. And sure, you have to put in effort, right? You have to put in effort. You have to be focused. You have to know what you want and have clarity. But that
Yeah.
doesn't mean you have to suffer. Our society has this, like, this whole martyrdom. Oh,
Yeah, yeah.
she suffered so much.
Yeah.
Why?
What?
That's
I
not
don't want that.
no, and really, that's not why we're put here on earth. We're not here to suffer. We're here to live. We're here to love. We're here to serve. We're here to have joy and connect with other people, and
Yes.
do something positive. Suffering, that's all human made suffering.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So
We've put that into the normal, like they've tried to normalize suffering, and I'm like, no, I don't want to do that. Oh my gosh, yes. But it's been so amazing talking to you. I do have
thank
two
you.
questions
Okay,
that I like to
sure.
ask all of my guests, so we'll jump into those. What would be the best piece of advice that you would give a younger version of yourself who was in the thick of struggle if you had just a few moments with them?
I would tell them to, one, start meditating, to listen to their heart. And
Yes.
no matter what the outside world is telling them, to listen to their heart and trust their heart.
Mm. I love that.
Trust their heart.
So beautiful.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. And then my last question, which is my favorite question, is we like to talk about power on the podcast and not thinking of that as a bad thing. How would you think of, or how would you describe the type of power that you try to step into every day?
I would say being happy. Waking up and consciously choosing, first of all, setting an intention for the day, and then choosing how I want to feel. Because when you make that choice, and if you start to waver, come back to it and say, I have the choice. All this shit can be going on around me, right? But I still have the choice as to how I want to feel. And so, when that shit show shows up, which invariably it does, right? How do I want to feel? Okay. Am I feeling some negative emotion? Okay. That's all right. But then what's the next best feeling thought that I can get to from here? How can I come back to that place of feeling happy and centered and trusting, So for me, that is where your true power comes from. Because your true power is never from outside. Just like your true happiness is really, that comes from within.
I love that. It almost reminds me of those memes that you see sometimes on like Facebook or Instagram. And it's like flames, everything's like chaos around. And then it's like the person sitting in the middle, like everything's fine. And we always like look at it as like it's funny. But in reality, like that's how it could be if you just really want to have that mental attitude about it, that positive mental attitude. And then, like you said, like just because it's a shitstorm around you doesn't necessarily mean that your life has to be a shitstorm. So.
Right, exactly. And again, that takes practice. It's
it's
not
an overnight thing.
It's not an overnight thing. And, daily practice. Some days I do really well at it, and I still have days where I get out of the wrong side of the bed, so to speak, and I got to rein myself in and choose. And sometimes I just choose to feel shitty. Well, that's my choice. And then eventually I get tired of it. I'm like, okay, all right.
You're like, okay, I'm tired of feeling this way. Yeah.
I'm tired of
oh my gosh.
Well, I might be in this way. I'm tired of feeling this way. Like, I could feel happy right now. Why am I staying over here?
Yes. And also like enjoy the journey, because I've got a long ways to go. And I love how you mentioned that it's a journey. It's a lifelong thing. Like healing doesn't have, it happens every day, and change happens every day. So like, a lot of times we get into that mindset of like, well, I want to be where this person is, thinking that this person has like this golden, like, and thinking that they don't ever have a bad day. Or like you said, like you still have negative days, you still have negative thoughts. Like that's normal. Like, so just enjoy the process, enjoy the journey. And then you get, at some point in your journey, you get to look back and be like, oh man, I have come a really long way. And for me, I like to just see where I've come in the past year. When I look back at myself, last year, I'm like, wow, she's really got some knowledge on her now and some change happening. And so, and then it gets you excited for the future. I can't wait to be, a better person next year, and so I think I love that you said that with the journey, and, it's a lifelong thing.
It is, because we're constantly growing, and we're never going to get it all done. So, let's stop beating ourselves up and comparing ourselves, and just, focus on being happy and in that moment to moment, and being present. So much of our awareness is future. It's like, let's be present with what we're doing. And even if you don't like what you're doing, because I have things in my day-to-day that I don't really enjoy, it's not really my bailiwick, but this too shall pass. So how can I make the
Yes.
best of it?
I love your message, and I
Thank you
love
so much.
everything that you shared with us today. Thank you so much, Carolyn, for being on and really and truly sharing your incredible story of transformation with all of us. I will make sure that I link your social medias in the show notes, and if I can find a link for that book, I will put that there too, so you guys can check that book out. Today. But yes, thank you so much for being on. It's been such a pleasure and an honor to have you here.
Thank you so much, Jessica. Thank you so much. Really enjoyed it. It's a lot of fun.
I want to thank you guys so much for tuning in today. I want to thank my guests again for sharing their incredible story of transformation with us. I have linked their social medias below in the show notes so that you can give them a follow through their journey. Also, don't forget to check out the art that goes along with each week's episode at iempower.club. If you personally feel connected to the art and you would like to purchase a limited edition print that goes along with it as your own reminder to step into your power, you can do so at our website. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram at iempowerclub, on TikTok at iempowerclub, and of course, YouTube at iempower. And don't forget to like and subscribe so that you don't miss next week's episode of I Empower. See you then.